Hello everybody, and welcome to my video on the Lomography Diana Plus, but we're going to do more than that in this video. We're going to look at, of course, the Diana Plus, but I have another version of it here, the Dreamer, which we'll take a look at. And I have this here, a version of the original 1960s Dianas called the Windsor. You can kind of see how closely these things are designed to each other. And then one last one, which is as much Holga as Diana Plus. I have the Plastic Filmtastic 120 from the Film Photography Project, a camera which I was quite happy to be the first person to take out of the box. And one of the things that tells you that it's as much Holga as anything else is the 1:8 60mm, but it's called the Debonair. The Debonair was an old name for one of the variants of the Diana. So there are some interface differences with the FPP camera, but we'll take a look at that as well. But primarily, we're going to hang out here with the modern Lomography Diana Plus. The Diana Plus is a plastic fantastic, as they call them, toy grade 120 film camera that takes, well, depending on the model, 16 4x4 images, which would be the case of the vintage Windsor, or 12 6x6 images, as would be the case of the modern Lomography ones, or 16 645 images, as is the case with the FPP camera. Now you can tell how many images are going to take based on where the red window is. You can see here, this is the red window for 645, or in this case 4x4 format. And this is the red window here for either 12 6x6s or 16 645s if you have the framing mask for the Lomography ones. And I have had 3 of these cameras and none of them came with the framing mask. So at any rate, they have no meter. They have a very simple guillotine or leaf style shutter. I'm honestly not sure. It's a guillotine shutter. Very simple guillotine shutter. The shutter speeds are bulb and instant, the latter of which varies wildly based on the specific camera, its age, how much it's been used and abused, and so forth. All of mine have, well, the 2 Lomographies are pretty close, but by and large, the instant speeds are not close to each other on these 4. The flash sync on these cameras, for those that have a flash sync, is either of the shutter speeds. Not all models, by the way, have a flash sync. So for instance, this one does not. But this version of the Lomography has a flash port right here on top. And the FPP Debonair has a hot shoe up here. These are the toyest of toy grade cameras. The Lomography versions are a reboot of the vintage Diana cameras, like this Windsor here. And there are many, many versions of the Diana Plus from Lomography. I have the Dreamer, and I know that there are a number of others. There's a 35mm version that's in the other room, and some things like that. So if you are interested in collecting different Dianas, modern and vintage, it's a very deep rabbit hole. The image circle for these cameras, as a general statement, varies between the cameras and the focus point. So for instance, at infinity focus, which is right here, this is at infinity focus, the image circle kind of covers 6x6 in a very loose sense of the term. At close focus, it does pretty well. And that gives a lot of the camera's unique look that it has, the way that the image circle changes and the way that the illumination across the image circle changes with focus. Also, I meant to note earlier, if you are here interested in all of the different variants, I have a link to a Camerapedia article that lists them all. I accidentally printed it out, and it's like 3 pages, 2 pages. It's a lot. Anyway, it covers the old, and I think just the old ones. There were so many of them. Anyway, using these cameras presents a challenge for photographers as they are very lo-fi and capturing captivating images with them requires a keen eye for how they perform. Yes, you can just put film in there and say, oh, hey, this lo-fi image, it's captivating because it's lo-fi. But that's kind of cheating yourself, not the camera or the film, but yourself. And if you really want to make the most of these, then what you really want to try to do is learn how they work and figure out how to take that image aesthetic and apply it to your work. Also, if you wanted to modify a vintage model to take 645 images in portrait orientation, it would be feasible by filing away the back of the camera. So here's my vintage Windsor. I have not done that, but you can see here's the 4x4 framing. But if you took a file and you filed this down here to make this longer, you could change your camera's aspect ratio. And I've heard of that being done. You don't get a ton, but you get a little bit more, and it does make them much more portraity. While we have this back open, I'm going to show you one tip that I would give you regardless of what model camera you have. If you're shooting multiples of them, you might see there where I put a notch down there to help me keep track of which camera took which photos so I know what problems the different cameras have. Ooh, boy, do they have problems. The other thing I did was I took some 3000 grit sandpaper and I sanded the edges here. So I sanded the edges of the box, of the shutter box itself, and I sanded this plastic facing here on all of them because all of the cameras were scratching the negatives. But I'll tell you what, after sanding this down with 3000 grit sandpaper, it is smooth like glass, and these don't scratch the negatives anymore. So I sanded the angles here, I sanded the faces a little bit, but mostly I sanded along in here. And a fun fact about the vintage ones especially, but I believe this is also true of the Lomography reboot cameras, with a roll of 120 film loaded, they only weigh 200 grams and size-wise are about the same size as a Leica M. The target market for these, especially the Lomography ones, are kids, people who want to have fun, people who are looking for that lo-fi aesthetic, and also toy camera enthusiasts and shooters. And toy cameras are a ton of fun. This is, like I said, the toyest of the toys. Most everything is plastic. Some have metal trim, and there are a couple of they have metal springs in the shutters. They might also have metal shutter leaves, but I don't think so. It doesn't look metal. As for the manufacturer, the original ones here, like this Windsor that I've just brought back out, these were made by the Great Wall Plastic Factory in the 1960s in Kowloon, Hong Kong. But today they're made by the Lomography Company, which I believe all of their cameras are made in China. And I think that's actually, maybe they say it on them. No, they don't. Anyway, I believe they're made in China. And for the old vintage ones like the Windsor, they were made in the 1960s. There's no production start and stop date available anywhere that I've found. But for the reboots, according to Amazon, they were first launched on 28 August 2005, and as far as I know, they are still in production. At least some of the versions of them are still in production. I'm sure that these are very popular cameras that are still being made. At this point, I'm pretty sure that the reboot has been made for longer than the original. So as we do, let's go over the features of the Diana Plus. This is basically the prototypical version of this camera. And what we will do is, after we've gone over this, we'll look at some of the differences with the other models. So this is the top. Technically on the sides, we have the strap bars. This is where you could connect a camera strap if you wanted to. On top of this, we have a whole lot of nothing. We have the model, and we have the, oh, that is not a pleasant sound. We have the film advance knob. On top of the lens, we have the shutter speed selection dial right here, and then the actual shutter button itself. On the front of the camera, not a whole lot. Viewfinder window. Lens. Lens focus is right here. What the heck? Something just came out of my lens's focusing helicoid. Looks like some paper. On the underside of the lens, we have the aperture selection, which is have lots of clouds, partly cloudy, lots of sun, pinhole. And basically, it goes from largest to smallest aperture. On the back of the camera, not a whole lot here to see. We've got the viewfinder window and your window indicating whether or not you are taking 12 6x6s or 16 645s. I do find this interface, by the way, Lomography, just a little bit confusing and messed up a couple rolls of film early on, but that one's on me. On the bottom, we have the Lomography name, tripod socket, and film back lock. Oh yeah, made in China right there. I completely missed it. If it was a snake, it would have bit me. Anyway, we're going to unlock the film back and remove it. And in here, we have the film roll chamber. This is where the new roll of film will go. Here we have the camera shutter box. And here we have the spot where the empty roll of film will go. And then on the back, you can see there's a couple of ridges here that help keep the film flattish. Now, I mentioned I had sanded these. I did also sand the faces of this interior here and then put a little piece of tape there so that I could tell which one was the Diana Plus. And it does a pretty good job of keeping track of which camera is which. Now, while we have the film back open, let's swap the film and load new film in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this part down like that. We're going to take out the empty film spool. And actually probably should have just grabbed the handle that's meant for pulling it. Oh well. We're going to transfer the empty film. Oh, darn it. I'm going to transfer the empty film spool over here. I don't like that something sounded like it went flying. Part of that went flying. This is not going to clip in place now. Doing these upside down is so much fun. All right, so if you ever break that, goodness. All right, I'm just going to put some glue here and hope that this holds. I'm using B7000. Get to find out how well this holds tomorrow. Since everything else is the same. All right, that spool's already loaded. Don't have to break another camera. All right, so now we're going to load film. All right, so we've got the film spool over here. We're going to rotate the advance knob until we can see the slit in the spool this way. Now we're going to take our new film. By new, I'm being very gracious here, our 1960s Tri-X pan film that has not seen the light of day in decades. And we're going to use this in our camera. We're going to load it in here like that. Now, one thing about these is they really do not like film that comes on metal spools. I found that on my standard Diana Plus, it kept jamming itself with the metal spool. It did not care for that one bit. But that's what I got. And this guy seems to be doing it a whole lot better. Okay. So we're gonna, one thing about the way that these load is you want to try to get the paper backing wedged up underneath that lip, just like that is. Now we're going to advance. And eventually we will see this arrow. We're just going to stop right now, and we're going to put the film back on. Lock it in place. Now, even though we're going to be shooting 12 6x6s, I'm going to open up this window so that I can see that arrow go past, and maybe you can too. Oh, man. This one also does not like the metal spools. There goes the arrow. Oh, that's not good. That is not the way that's supposed to go. Also, not the first time that's happened with this camera. Okay. Let's see if that happens again. Okay. Now we're just going to start advancing the film until we start seeing some numbers. And at this point, we're going to switch this back to the 12 because we're going to be shooting 6x6s. So we're going to follow the arrows until we see, probably it's going to say Tri-X pan number 1. Number 1, there we go. So when you see the number 1 in the window there, that the film is properly loaded. Now, film is one and done. It can record light a single time in a controlled manner with a proper shutter speed and aperture to create an image, or in an uncontrolled manner by being exposed to all of the light that can possibly reach it, like that. So if you open up your camera during your roll, you will erase all the photos you have or can take on it. With 120 you get a little bit more forgiveness. Like, I'm going to guess everything past about frame 3 isn't ruined on this camera, on this roll rather, other than the fact that it's just super old film. Anyway, I want to show you what's going on when you advance film in this camera. If you'll remember, the number 1 was in that window we saw in the middle for the 6x6 images. After you take your photo, you advance your film, and then eventually the number 2 comes up. So what you're seeing in that red window is the printing on the back of the 120 paper, just like that. And you advance your film and advance your film, and eventually you get to the very end of the roll, and it's all taken up on the spool. I'll show you. And 12 is the last number. Now, again, bearing in mind you have to have your film back on the entire time you're doing this. When you get to the end, you'll see this long bar marking or whatever other marking is on the specific film you're using. And then eventually, you'll get to the very end. And at this point, it's pretty much safe to open up the back of the camera. And once you've opened up your camera, then you can take your roll of film out, fold the end over, seal this. I am definitely not licking an adhesive from the 1960s. And send this off to the lab if it's good film to be developed. Then what you want to do is grab the empty spool that you just used, move it over to the other side. Actually, this is probably a little bit safer to do it this way. Maybe. There we go. Move it over to the other side and get it ready. If you're going to load up another roll of film, load up another roll of film. If not, set your camera off to the side today, and you are ready to go about your day. All right, real quickly, before we get any further, let's take a look at some of the differences here in the way these are built. Here's the Film Photography Project one, which has the hot shoe here. This Diana Plus streamer has the Lomography proprietary hot shoe. The focus on the Film Photography Project camera is significantly easier. You move the entire lens instead of just that fiddly little bit in the front of it. The shutter release also significantly, from a tactile perspective, much nicer. Aperture selection, there's only flash and bright. So that's a bit of a difference. And I think this does not have a bulb setting, it's only instant. And then on the inside, I'll show you what it looks like because it's a little bit different. You can see it has the 645 viewfinder, a couple of notches that I put in there. But other than that, it's very similar. The wings down here are a little bit different, a little bit more robust. And I will say that advancing the film in the Film Photography Project camera is significantly easier to do. So if you are looking for one of these to actually shoot with, the Film Photography Project camera, which is made in Hong Kong, also probably comes from a different factory, that means. But if you're looking for one of these to actually shoot with, I would take a look at the Film Photography Project one as a carry-around shooter. All right, now that we've seen everything there is to see about all of these different cameras, let's take a look at how to take a picture with them. The process is pretty much the same, regardless of what version of this camera or variation you're using. What you're going to do is you're going to make sure that you're on a fresh frame. You're going to look through the viewfinder, sight up your scene, and then when you're looking through the viewfinder, you're going to trip the shutter. You'll want to make sure that your shutter speed is set to either instant if you want that, or bulb if you're going to take a long exposure, and that your aperture is also set to the correct aperture setting. And then that's all you have to do. If you are focusing at something closer than infinity, you'll of course need to adjust the focus a little bit, like that. But once you have the focus adjusted, which is infinity, 2 to 4 meters, or 1 to 2 meters, so something distant, group shot, or individual shot, That's it. Very simple. All right, so we've taken a photo. What about double exposures? Bear with me, this is a complex process. Just like that. If you want to take multiple exposures, you just do the same thing as taking a photo, but you don't advance the film afterwards. After you've taken your exposure or double exposure, you just advance the film until you get to the next number in the red window. So, some tips for using this camera. If you're looking at getting one or more of the Lomography cameras, as far as I know, the differences between them are pretty much strictly cosmetic, with the exception of whether or not they have the ability to take a flash. I will say that the ones that I have used perform the same way. The next tip is, regardless of whether you have a Lomography new one, an old Diana Plus, the Film Photography Project, any of the very similar cameras to this, enjoy it. Just really enjoy it. They're fun cameras. Just make the most of them. The next tip I have for you is get a fast film, because I shot this Dreamer right here wide open on a very lightly cloudy day with 100 ISO Shanghai, and the images were all super underexposed. So a 400 ISO film and no slower is strongly recommended for these. The first time you use your camera, try it without taping up the body. If you don't get a light leak in your camera, hey, that is fantastic. If your camera does get a light leak, then you'll want to get some black gaffer's tape and tape up the seams in the camera to try to prevent those light leaks. And also, one other thing, if you do decide that you need to tape up your camera, you don't just tape up the seams around the camera, you also tape up the seam between the body and the top, because that's another place where light leaks can occur. And just remember that just because this is a toy-grade camera, that doesn't mean that it can't teach you about photography. The Diana and the similar cameras are going to teach you how to work within your gear's limitations. They can teach you how to be spontaneous, they can teach you how to evoke a mood or an atmosphere, and they can also teach you that doing that is better than technical precision. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.